Hello and welcome. Wherever you are in the world today, thank you for joining us for the Rise Traveler, unpacking conversations of sustainable travel. We are here to talk to eco-minded and socially conscious travelers, diversity and inclusion specialists, wildlife conservationists, environmental activists, and anyone using travel as a way to uplift and inspire. Together, we will go a step beyond the Instagram-ready world of travel and take a look at how travel can be a source of growth and development for all people and all communities. This podcast is an extension of the Rise Travel Institute, a 501c3 nonprofit committed to empowering young travelers through educational programs, research, study tours, and scholarships. Visit risetravelinstitute.org to learn more. And now, here's your host, Amy Hager.
Hello, wherever you are in the world today. Thank you for joining us on the Rise Traveler, unpacking conversations of sustainable travel. I'm super excited today to have Michael Luongo, a freelance writer focusing on tourism redevelopment after conflict, on today's episode. Michael, thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me, Amy. And also appreciate you, Rise, and Vinci inviting me to be a part of this conversation. So thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, why don't you, before we dive into the many different rabbit holes and questions that I want to go with you today, can you give us a little bit more about your background and why you focus on tourism redevelopment after conflict? It's such a unique area of focus.
So, I'm one of those people that when you look at my bio, you look at my CV, you look at my website, or you just Google me and there's all of this stuff that comes up. I'm very hard to figure out from the different things that I do.
Yes, as someone who was researching you, I will agree with that and confirm.
And I think, people say, oh, you got to focus on one thing, and I never will. And this is who I am, and that's just the way it is. So the easiest way to often describe myself is I'm both an academic and a journalist, a writer, author, things like that in terms of how I define myself. But generally, with a quick bio, I say a journalist and an academic. Among the things that I focus on is looking at tourism redevelopment in the context of conflict. So that can be direct wars, that can be after a war where a place is very associated with a war. We are recording this on September 10th. Tomorrow is the 24th anniversary of September 11th. That was the event that really changed the work that I do. So I was better known for my gay tourism, what we would call LGBTQ tourism. Now, both as a journalist, but in particular as an academic, when I was getting my master's at Rutgers, I published some of the first pieces. Some would call me a pioneer in bringing this into the academic fold. So Annals of Tourism Research with my professor, Brian Holcomb. We had the first, so far as we know, in an academic publication with Dr. Stephen Clift and Carrie Callister in 2002. We had the first academic textbook on the gay tourism industry. So that was my original background. September 11th happens. New York is home. I'm really from New Jersey originally. And my then brother-in-law was a cop. So he said, come in. You could not go in fact, they were arresting journalists and photographers for trying to get anywhere near Ground Zero. He said, come with me and be part of a recovery crew, rescue and recovery crew. And then you can come in with me because I'm a cop, a police officer, and you can be in Ground Zero. Now that experience of digging through the rubble to 110-story buildings and all the surrounding buildings as rubble, where you're digging through the rubble looking for your fellow New Yorkers, was incredibly transformative, which is an understatement. I thought of Beirut. I'd not yet been to Beirut, but I thought of Beirut and the Civil War and what it must have been like to dig. We see this in Gaza, we see this in Ukraine, people digging through the rubble for people. And that was what I was experiencing in New York, of all places. So that changed my journalism. I still did gay tourism, but I knew we were going to launch into wars. So I decided to look at how does tourism get rebuilt in the context of conflict. I'd already looked at this in Israel and Palestine after the Oslo Accords, so in the mid or early to mid 90s. But what we were going to do in Afghanistan, what would happen in Iraq,
Mhm.
what would happen in other locations, even if they were decades after their war, El Salvador, the Falklands. So these were things that I looked at. And then by 2012, 2013, um, one of the issues was when you write about this as a journalist, and I wrote for New York Times, Bloomberg News, many other publications, but editors would cancel half of my work.
Mhm.
And so I do all this work that never saw the light of day. And really, on top of the Citadel in Erbil, which was the regional capital in Kurdistan, that had been picked to be the Arab City of Tourism for 2014, that was where I started to see, well, the social fabric isn't matching with the business fabric, and the archaeologists aren't communicating, here, and then the government doesn't really know how to reach out to the West for traveling. And that's where I decided I'm going to go back for a PhD and look at this in a more holistic way. That's been another struggle in itself. Ultimately, here at Purdue, I'm a PhD student in the School of Hospitality and Tourism Management, and my focus is Iraq, Rwanda, and Ukraine, and looking primarily at the motivations of those early tourists who go to those destinations. And then I'll look also at the people that welcome them and some other components of this. So that's the background. That's how I began to look at this.
Yeah.
September 11th was really the crux of it.
Aware of it.
So,
Yeah, I get that. And I think for so many of us in, I'm going to say the journalism media world, that
mhm,
day was a game changer. I was
yeah.
working production at a local CBS station.
Uh-huh.
And
Mhm,
I remember that day, but wow, what a unique experience and opportunity and how this has shaped your career and what you focus on.
mhm,
Just to kind of give a little bit more of a clarification even,
mhm.
how does the work that you do differ from the term dark tourism? Like
Okay.
what is the difference between that?
So dark tourism, there's some really great academic experts on that. Philip Stone, for
Mhm.
example, there's the Dark Tourism Institute
Yeah,
in the UK, and they've been doing that work for a few decades now. Um, we have this debate here at Purdue, and I also want to stress that I speak for myself. I don't represent Purdue. I don't represent any of the publications that I write for. Does what I look at fall under the field of dark tourism? Is it separate? Is it related but somehow different? And so these are questions that we have as an approach. Dark tourism, or thanatourism, or death tourism, I generally view as something that happens decades after the actual event.
okay.
So I grew up among Holocaust survivors. My uncle was in Dachau, for example, as a resistance fighter against the Nazis. Dark tourism, the most famous dark tourism site in all of the world is Auschwitz.
Right.
You could argue Ground Zero, of course, is a dark tourism site as well, and it certainly is. But very often it becomes much more structured,
Mhm.
and becomes linked in more with the existing tourism infrastructure and is often decades after the fact.
Yeah,
That's how I view it.
I think that's
Um,
pretty clear.
yeah, what I look at is more, how do you, in the midst of conflict or soon after conflict, how do you look at the rebuilding of the social fabric? How do you look at rebuilding the business community? And most important, I think, for the outsiders, is how do you help them overcome this perception of danger, even when a war has ended a long time ago?
Yeah.
I'm going to be doing a fellowship in Rwanda, and some friends of mine say, well, I won't visit you because it's dangerous. And I said, well, no,
Mhm.
that was 30, and I will be looking at aspects of the genocide. Is
Right.
clearly that's why I'm there. But they still look at it through that lens. And this, I think, is one of the most important things and the most difficult thing for many locations. So it's more, where does all of this as a sector, the tourism sector,
Hmm.
fit economically with the rebuilding? And that's what I look at,
Yeah.
which is different. You can look at it as a component of dark tourism,
Yeah.
but it's really before that dark tourism formalizes within a location.
Okay.
That's
And
how I differentiate what I do.
That makes a lot of sense, and
Yeah,
I think being able to make that difference, but also see how they're
yeah,
interconnected
yeah.
is very
Mhm.
important, right? Like
Yeah,
all these systems are very connected.
yeah.
Well, so then knowing that I'm going to say you are an expert on tourism redevelopment after conflict, clearly.
Mhm.
I'm curious on your take on when President Trump announced
Mhm.
to use the space in Gaza for lack of a better description, a luxury destination. And I remember when that news broke and that plan broke, how I felt about it. But knowing what you know and with all the research that you've done, I'm curious, what is your take on that?
Well, it's horrifying. I mean, it's absolutely horrifying. Um, Essentially, what you're talking about is clearing out 2 million people
Hmm.
via genocide, ethnic cleansing. Uh, what's the term that they're using? Voluntary removal, but it's not voluntary in any way, shape, or form. That's horrific to begin with. And what you're talking about essentially is building luxury resorts over the bodies of dead people. I mean, there's no other way to define it. Um, if you were to stop the war now
Hmm.
and figure out a way peacefully to rebuild while people are still living in Gaza, um, this is not a bad plan if the people that live there are considered. But the way in which it has been presented is a complete clearing out of 2 million people.
Yeah.
And we can argue the numbers that still exist right now. Um, and basically just clear cutting and building luxury resorts. I will say that I have been to Gaza. I was there in 2012. It's another
Okay.
example of an article that got killed by the publication that I was writing it for. And I looked at, places that they don't exist anymore. So Islamic University, I looked at some projects there. Students were building architectural models of planned hotels for the seafront. Um, Saw that cafe that had been bombed, that where all those journalists had been. There's many cafes, unfortunately, like that. And we're also looking at Saint Hilarion Monastery, which at the time was hopefully the ruins to be used as a to rebuild tourism or as a site that could be used to promote tourism to Gaza.
Hmm.
So it's horrific. Had I even not been to Gaza, that had been a place I'd never been to, it's a horrific plan. But
Yeah.
it's a place that I've been to. It's where people I know live and died, were murdered. Um, and we know that the war started on October 7th with Hamas, October 7th, 2023, that 2-year anniversary is coming up. And that's a horrific anniversary. And, I ran a panel at the New York Travel and Adventure Show. And one of the women on our panel, one of her relatives was killed, by Hamas that day. So I know people who've been killed on both sides or a variety of sides. War is horrible for
Yeah.
ordinary people. It's absolutely horrible. Um, but it sits in this context, and how could you use, and that was the hope of the Oslo Accords. It sits in this context of two-state solution, which is
Hmm.
further and further away from ever happening, and that tourism could, be what binds the two states together, because you could go back and forth in the way that, peace between Israel and Jordan resulted in this tourism that
Hmm.
didn't exist before, to such a great degree that Jordan was a side trip from Israel. And now Jordan has something like 4 times the amount of people who visit versus Israel.
Yeah.
So I don't see hope.
Yeah.
I just see this as really horrific. But maybe we could take this plan and still implement it, but with consideration of the people in situ. Um, and this would provide jobs ultimately for them. And it's a beautiful place. It's a
Yeah.
beautiful place. So that's my opinion of that.
Yeah. And
So thank you
I
for
think
asking.
I think the other thing too that I'm really, really curious about how you
Mhm.
see and what you're thinking is you mentioned this word hope. And I
Mhm.
think in President Trump's first administration, You actually gave me this language, so thank you. I'm borrowing it.
Mhm.
He is one of the first presidents that have really been in the tourism industry and knows what this industry
Mhm.
is about more than others. And so I back in 2017, you had mentioned that you were on a panel. And so I'm curious
Mhm.
about your experience then and how that hope that maybe our industry had for what could have been some good things have not played out at all in tourism, and how this has just dramatically changed what
Mhm.
little hope we did have.
Yeah, yeah. So we talked. I didn't vote for Trump. I have met Trump. I've met Trump in a tourism context. This is a much longer story, but I met him in Trump Tower at a presentation about a golf resort in the Caribbean.
Mhm.
Um, Trump Tower was, you know, whether you liked Trump or not, Trump Tower, and for a period of time, I worked across the street,
Yeah,
from Trump
sure.
Tower, and you could run errands in it. I used to go and sit in the atrium behind it because it was quiet and, just do work. It was part of the fabric, the tourism fabric of New York. Um, one of the things is whether you liked him or not, um, he was the one president we've had who really understood the travel industry. And
Right.
so the New York Times travel show, which no longer exists, it's a victim of the COVID pandemic. But I ran in the Middle East panels at the New York Times travel show, started those and moderated them. And there was a lot of hope that many people in the tourism industry, well, maybe he's not the person we like, but he knows travel. And so he'll be good for travel, whether we like him or not. But
Right.
during that show, that very weekend, what we call the Muslim ban was announced. And so Rene Duteral, who was on my panel, he would sell Iran among other destinations, was interviewed a lot, um, you know, from the show itself. So immediately, what has happened is that his policies are damaging to tourism. They were damaging back then. COVID happened. Obviously, that was, he didn't create that virus, but a lot of it is the response to that virus or the late response to that. And now what we're seeing, and we've talked about, the YouGov Trump and statistics uh, presentation that they had recently that kind of broke down a lot of these statistics where Canadians in particular are not traveling to the United States. So for somebody who understands travel and was this person that maybe we thought would help tourism in the United States, it's been the opposite. He's damaged tourism in the United States. And Canada in particular, you've problems for Las Vegas, the border region of Canada where people would just drive back and forth for mini vacations. Um,
Right.
Certain countries are coming more Mexicans, which seems ironic.
Right.
Um, and we talked about Italy and Japan, the numbers are up a little bit, but mostly worldwide, it is down. So that's the irony.
Mhm.
Um, but he still is building. He's not supposed to be doing this while president, but building projects or proposing projects that he'll make a lot of money from, which are really about his power and influence as president of the United States. So it's been damaging,
Yeah.
and that's the irony of somebody who should be so skilled in this. And he should have. I think he maybe should have prioritized tourism as someone who is an icon of the tourism industry. So that's the irony that I find. So
And so we've reflected quite a bit and we've talked a little bit, about the current day and what's going on now. I'm curious about the future.
mhm.
How do you see the future of the travel and tourism industry, especially with that link between tourism and terrorism, the rebuilding and redevelopment after conflict? How do you see that future coming together?
So again, we don't really have crystal balls, but we can look back and kind of project and see some of the things. There is this strong link, like you said, between tourism and terrorism. I've gone to speeches where people accidentally mix up the words. They're so intertwined
Easy.
with
I
each
had
other.
to like slow down when I said
Yeah, yeah.
it.
Yeah, just yeah. But we are now 24 years out from September 11th. We know tourism in New York bounced back tremendously. The very site associated with it is a place that people go to visit. The Pentagon Memorial. I have not been to the memorial in Pennsylvania, but I've driven somewhat nearby it. Even these things become incorporated within the tourism. That's the dark tourism component as it becomes part of the infrastructure. War will always transform tourism, but tourism always comes back in some way. We
Mhm.
spoke a little before we were recording about how Dubai would not be what it was if the war in Beirut had not happened. So tourism had to find a place, and Dubai wound up being that place. Plus, the money from war is really what fueled so much money was funneled through Dubai. So you do get that. So you get tourism in different ways. It may shift tourism to regions. You're seeing this in Ukraine, where the hotel occupancy in areas not impacted by war has been up. Israel would also experience things like that whenever there are wars. So shifts will occur. People want to travel. People will find ways to travel. We talked about how 9/11, again, this is all as we were preparing. Latin American tourism boomed in the aftermath of September 11th because people wanted to travel, but they also didn't want to cross large oceans. And they wanted to be able to, if worst came to worst, they could just take a very long bus ride back to the United States from Latin America. And so
Yeah.
tourism boomed. It will find a way. And even if we look back to World War II, an example that I give is no one would ever know who Carmen Miranda is if World War II had not happened
Mhm.
because Hollywood vacationed in Brazil because they couldn't vacation in Europe. And that's how she was discovered. So there's these ways in which culture shifts, tourism shifts, but people will figure out ways to travel. And that's what I find hopeful. What will they rebuild? How will it be rebuilt?
Right.
That's the big question. Will Gaza be rebuilt in a way that helps the people that are there or in some horrific way? Will Ukraine figure out a way to get back all of its territory? And these are horrific wars where people die every day. So we want that peace to come. But moreover, what I think is really important is how does that tourism then fit with the peace process and keeping the peace process?
Yeah.
Uh,
And I think,
which might go ahead.
well, and I was going to say, I think you had talked a little bit about the peace process and how all of that is just really raveled together
Mhm,
and really describing how the social thread with the
mhm,
human thread, with the thread of
mhm,
desire to explore and
mhm,
experience something different that we naturally have as humans,
mhm,
how that all comes together. Hopefully, it comes together not at the cost of humans.
mhm.
And
Yeah,
I know you
yeah.
wrote a piece about that in the Institute of Tourism, and we'll make sure we link that in
Mhm,
the show notes.
mhm.
So, as we kind of wrap up our conversation
Uh-huh,
today, I'm really curious. Michael,
uh-huh.
what legacy do you want to leave
Yeah.
behind in this world?
So I started to touch a little bit on that when we were talking about rebuilding, the future of tourism. Um, I am getting older. I'm late middle age, I guess, at 57 now. Um, I don't have children, but there's people that I teach, so there's that legacy of that. But I think that one of the things in the way that I was among the first to bring gay tourism, LGBTQ tourism into academia way back in the mid 90s is to think about this kind of tourism and how places rebuild and to write about it to continue to have an academic legacy of you are ultimately what you write. That's a legacy that you leave, whether journalistically or academically, and what you teach people to think about the things that you have researched. But ultimately, what I hope is that people have a better understanding in looking at places that recover from tourism is where the social fabric fits with this. with the rebuilding, because that's been torn apart, whether religion, ethnicity, geography, that's been torn apart. The business environment has been torn apart. Um, and there's people that have stayed behind who welcome people. But what I think is really important to think about rebuilding tourism, and if this is a legacy that I can think of, or that my work, my research, my writing can help people to think about, is how can tourism be rebuilt as a driver of the economy? It's 10% of the world economy, but
Right.
how can it drive the rebuilding of those locations where they welcome people and where people realize, okay, maybe I have an ethnic or religious difference with my neighbor, and we fought about that, but now we can talk about this. We can use this to tell the story of the war so
Yeah.
that it doesn't happen again. And once people realize that tourism is rebuilding the economy, that tourism is bringing people to have a better understanding of why a war happened. We can, one, use that to teach people to not have war, though Lord knows war will continue to happen, unfortunately. But
Mhm.
for particular countries where they can see as they rebuild tourism, and this was the hope I saw after the Oslo Accords, that there'd be this tourism back and forth
Right.
between Israel and Palestine and all this infrastructure that wound up being built, that places can realize they can welcome people.
Yeah.
That we don't want a war again because we love this economy that has brought tourism. And tourism where it fits, we would rather welcome people to our beaches or to what we have rebuilt of a look at Japan as an example. I think Japan is this example of where tourism, whether you want to count it as dark tourism, the anniversary of Hiroshima, August 6th, for example, the 80th anniversary of that. But it's this peaceful nation that understands, and it was once this empire building place that invaded all of these other locations. So the legacy is really when rebuilding tourism in a way where locations never want to go to war again because
Mm.
they understand how important tourism is and why ruin that. And so whether it's my interviewing people about their experiences in a former conflict zone or interviewing those who've welcomed them, I want people to think about that and where tourism and the peace that can come through it can be continued into the future. That, I would think, is my legacy, that I would like to have people, I suppose, remember was the purpose of the work.
Yeah.
Thank you for asking about that.
No, I
Thank you.
love that. And I love that line of rebuilding tourism where people don't want to go to war again.
Yeah.
What a dream. What a
Yeah.
dream to work
Yeah.
towards.
Yeah.
Well, Michael, thank you so much
Uh,
for diving in with me today.
uh,
This was a very
Thank you, Amy.
interesting conversation, and I hope our audience have been able to learn a little bit more and
Mhm,
understand a little bit more deeply on the world that you are so immersed in.
mhm.
And thank you for sharing with us.
Yeah. Thank you. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank
Yes.
you.
And so
Thank you,
that
Amy.
brings us to the end of our journey today. And so if you've liked what you've heard and you would like to hear more, please remember to subscribe, comment, or like. You can always follow us at Rise Travel Institute on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. And here at the Rise Travel Institute, we do believe unconscious travel can help create a more just and equitable world. And if you'd like to learn more, I encourage you to go over to the risetravelinstitute.com for more information on our educational programs. And we'll be back soon with another episode. But until then, keep roaming, keep learning, and continue to be a Rise Traveler. Bye bye.